Dots has always been a very fun team to be used due to how different the playstyle is compared to traditional hypercarry DPS. With Kafka's buff coming very soon by the time this video was made, and also with Hysilens who will be another Dot character, these changes will give a much needed update to Dot playstyle that has been stagnant for over a year. While the others keep getting OP characters, what is exactly the problem with Dot playstyle at this moment? In this video, I will pinpoint 6 problems that really hold Dots back, but I'm not going to talk about the current character flaws since those can always be updated, but instead, the design flaws of Dots as a combat mechanics in HSR. And after that, let's talk about what Hysilens will bring based on her Simulated Universe Golden Boon, and see if that will save Dots. What's up guys, KKaceh here, back to another discussion video about Honkai Star Rail game design. I was planning to make a Kafka buff analysis video initially, but as mentioned by our dear viewers and contributor to this channel, JKL, perhaps it is better to have discussion about Dot before talking about Kafka's buff, and how I personally would change her kit. I will give my analysis based on my observations, making comparison with other playstyle, and also based on my experience as a long-time turn-based game player. So join me in this discussion by leaving your thoughts in the comment section. Perhaps you might see things in a different perspective, and all of us can learn something new about game design, and who knows that Hoyo developers might see this video one day. Anyway, for now, let's talk about Dots. Before we start talking about problems, let's refresh our memory. What do we know about Dots at this moment? We do know that there are 2 types of Dots. Dots applied through skills or character passive, and also other things like light cones and blessings from Simulated Universe. And the second type of Dot, it's break Dots, that is applied when you break the enemy's weakness or toughness bar. The first category, we usually refer to them as normal Dots, and the second category is the break Dots. Let's have a look at how Dots are calculated. I'm going to leave that in the screen so you guys can know how the damage calculation is being done, both for normal Dots and also break Dots. For normal Dots, it is quite straightforward, with the only exception Wind Shear that is able to apply multiple stacks. As for break Dots, it is a bit different for some of the Dots, as the multipliers differs based on the type of Dot applied. I will leave a link in the description. There's a post in Hoyo Lab that really goes in depth for the break Dot. Now that we have refreshed ourselves about 2 types of Dots and how they are being calculated, let's talk about the problem with Dots. The first observation that I came up with is that the thing that makes Dot unique compared to other types of damage, Dot relies on the enemy turns to deal damage, while the characters only apply the ailments, which I'm referring to either you're applying Bleed, Burn, Shock, or Wind Shear. This unique characteristic of Dots is a detriment to this playstyle due to how Honkai Star Rail is being designed. Because for the most part, HSR challenges are time-bound. Waiting for the enemies to take turns, that means we're wasting our precious limited turns that we have. The only character that universally can trigger Dots during player turns or by player discretion is only Kafka at the moment, while Luca is able to trigger 1 instance of Bleed with his enhanced basic attack. So if you don't have Kafka, don't have a high hopes that your Dot team will do well, as we are waiting for the enemy to take actions, while the other teams, you can just kill them as soon as your character take their turns. Because how crucial to have a character that can trigger Dots during the player's turn or base our own timing, this causing the mechanic to be very character dependent. And that is just a poor game design in my opinion. And on top of that, for the most of HSR challenges that are time bound, unless the buff during the challenge is tailored for Dots, it is very difficult to clear them with full 3 stars, especially if you don't have the dedicated light cone for the 5-star characters. Not to mention, the limited pool of Dot characters right now is not really helping. With the 5 stars are only Kafka and Black Swan, and somewhat Jiaochu, but he's more of a defense shredder instead of actually a Dot character. And the 4 stars are great, but they really need more support. Honestly though, Dot can work as a strategy for other turn-based RPG games, because most of the time, there's no time limit in the battle, unlike in gacha games. So as long as HSR still continues to make time-bound challenges, Dot will most likely keep having a hard time, unless the core design of Dot itself is changed. There are many different solutions that we can try in dealing with this particular problem. My personal solution would be dots will detonate upon the enemies being attacked after a certain amount of time. So this way, the characters that can universally detonate dots will not go unemployed, and at the same time, bringing non-dot character can still be beneficial for a dot character, albeit it is not the optimal play. For an instance, we have Kafka, Guinaifen for example, and maybe Sampo. Kafka will always be able to trigger the dots using her ultimate or her skill, but Guinaifen or Sampo can trigger the dots too after attacking the enemies maybe 3 to 5 times. I personally think that this is a step towards the right direction, but if that's still making dot to be too slow to the current standard, make it detonate when a new stack of that dot type is applied. So this way, the old stack is not wasted because most of the dots cannot stack more than once per character other than wind shears. Once again, for example, every time Guinaifen using her skills, she will apply burn, but because burn cannot stack, when she uses her skill, the old burn will immediately detonates and the new burn will be applied. I prefer the second method more, but I don't know how powerful that is in theory. But if we want to make dot to be very unique, we can take another step further. They should make it like an elemental reaction in Genshin. When a certain types of element overlap with each other during the application, it will trigger special dots. There's a lot of things you can do with this particular game mechanics, and that alone can be a topic for another day. Which of these solutions do you prefer? Or do you have your own? Comment in the comment section. And the second point, dots can miss and it expires sometimes a bit too early when the boss changes phases. This has always been an argument of dot versus traditional DPS. Why does the dot team have to do all of these chores of applying stacks and the chance of missing or resisted when the enemies have a really high resistance and they're just wasting their turns away, while traditional DPS can just deal damage normally by ensuring having high crit rate and crit damage ratio. So basically, dot is not guaranteed. For the solution, I think this is pretty straightforward. Make dots to actually be guaranteed, except perhaps if the enemies have certain immunity towards it. Like the fire elemental enemies are immune to burn. But to balance this at the same time, make it so enemies have more vulnerability towards certain dots. Meaning, some enemies will take more damage from wind shears, some enemies will take more damage from burn, for example, like a frost elemental. So this way, it makes dots to be a bit more unique, as it allows us to strategize better on which dot characters we will bring on the fight that can help us tackle the challenge more efficiently. Naturally, this means that we need a lot more dot characters, especially the 4-star ones. And the third problems that I think that needs to be talked about, currently dot is stuck to 4 types: wind shear, bleed, burn, and shock. And these 4 are not exactly unique either, except wind shear. On top of that, I'm not sure why damage from frozen and entanglement are not counted as dots, where I think they should have been counted as dots. I can understand why imprisonment wouldn't be a dot because delaying the enemy's turn goes against the dot playstyle. You want them to take their turn so they take damage. Why are we delaying their turns, right? However, Frozen works really well with dots because the enemies will take turn without doing anything. And they're still taking damage from dots. So it is the perfect partner, but it is just that the synergy ends there. If the Frozen damage is considered as dot damage, this will boost the potential for even better synergy. Because with how dot's character tends to be squishy, and if they can avoid taking damage from the enemy, while also still dealing a decent amount of damage from Ice Dot, that is just good for Dot team overall. But of course, we cannot make enemies frozen too easily though, so they should make it similar to Remembrance Blessing from OG Simultaneous Universe, that it requires 6 stacks until the enemies are frozen. But before they're frozen, they're still receiving a chill damage every turn. So make it that this type of dot has 2 levels. The chill type when it's just another normal dot, and when there's just 6 stacks, it will become a frozen dot that not only stop the enemy from taking action, but also will be a stronger version of chill damage. Honestly, I truly think devs should consider tweaking the mechanics of dot around this point, like what the example I just gave you. If they do make these 2 elements become dots, the repertoire of dot strategy will be expanded so much more and enhance the strategy aspect of turn-based game in HSR. We can take this even further if we combine this with solution at point number 1 of elemental reaction. That will make finding your favorite team composition to be even more fun. Not only making Ice and Quantum to have their own dots, they should make each dots have more unique properties. Like at the moment we only have Wind Shear that can have multiple stacks. Maybe lightning dots when proc will hit adjacent enemies, like how electricity can travel. Basically, it kinda works like a destruction character attack. The main target will get 100% damage, and the adjacent enemies will only get a tiny percent of that damage. Or for Fire Dot, maybe they can spread to another enemies after the original carrier dies, so it kinda spreads like a wildfire. And lastly, maybe Bleed will chip enemies HP percent depending on the stack, or maybe even it will amplify the other dots. And there are many more ideas that they can try to develop around this particular mechanics. And just like the elemental reaction, this whole subtopic of typing can be a video of its own. So if you're interested to have a further discussion about this, do mention it in the comment section. So yeah, I think to make dots to be even more interesting, expand the typing of dots and make them more unique. Hey guys, sorry to interrupt in the middle. If you like what you hear so far and interested to hear more discussion content as we dissect more about game design elements in video games, especially in Honkai Star Rail, do leave a like as it will help me a ton in keep making video like this, and subscribe so you will know when the next video is up. Anyway, sorry for disturbing, let's continue with our discussion. The fourth problem that I think that needs to be addressed is about scaling. This has some relation with my previous point of dot characters being squishy. At this stage of the game, all dots are still attack scaled, and at the moment the enemies in Honkai Star Rail hits really hard, and if your characters have HP below 3000, they will die very fast, and most of the time your sustains cannot keep up with the damage output by the enemies, and even for 5-star characters. The 4 stars, no chance. I think dot should be moved more towards HP scaling, because dot usually tends to drag the fight a bit longer, and with HP scaling they can be a bit more tanky. That way the sustain can actually keep up with the damage. In addition, there's no specific sustain that caters to dot playstyle either, maybe except Huo that can give energy that benefits all dot characters. But if there's a healer that actually helps dot character especially, I think that it will somewhat fix the problem with dot team as well. This problem essentially raises the question, why should we play a chore team that is very squishy while we can play HP scaled characters with tons of crit built into them, like the Euphorious character? And while we're on this topic, on top of character having HP scaling, I think that dot should not have enemies defense scaling in the damage formula, and it should be elemental resistance dependent instead. Or by nature, make it so that dot already have defense ignored implemented into the damage calculation. Anyway, moving forward, developers should consider how they should scale their dot characters, or at the very least, how the damage is calculated to the enemies. I think dot is the biggest opportunity for Honkai Star Rail to evolve from simply pressing button to deal big damage to be a bit more strategic one. So that if you want to play more strategically, use dot team, but if you want to just go unga bunga, use the other teams. At the very least, make it so that Dot team is a high ceiling team that rewards player for playing strategically, because the teams are formed based on the enemy's composition and their weakness. Much like in my point number 2, where some certain enemies have more vulnerability towards a certain dot. Number 5, I think, is not the biggest problem, but still somewhat a problem. It is the lack of damage booster. For dots, there's no huge multiplayer enabler like critical. As I've mentioned many times throughout this video, crit-oriented characters are able to enjoy huge damage thanks to critical, and they're not very difficult to build and set up. On the other hand, Super Break team enjoys big damage by simply having a large break effects stats, but often the characters have a rather steep break effect requirements. I guess that's the drawback. You need, I don't know, maybe even 200 break effect or something. While dots only relies on character scaling, multiplayers, and the dot stacks, and we know how the limitation of stacks and how underdeveloped each dot mechanics, as they are not unique, this really holds back the dot playstyle. If the developers are not willing to play around to modify each dots, maybe the only way I can think of to somewhat help dot is by making one of the stats to be a damage booster for dot. And perhaps this can be addressed by making effect hit rate to play a more significant role in the dot's damage calculation. I'm not really sure how effect hit rate can contribute to boost dots, but the one that comes to mind at the moment, maybe excessive hit rate past 100% will be converted to increase in dot damage, or something like that. But if any of you, dear viewers, have some ideas on how to address this or make a specific stats to boost dot, do leave a comment. And the last problem that I want to propose is not exactly a problem per se, but more of a wasted potential at the moment. It is related to break dot. Break dot is more of a niche and bonus right now for dot team, since we need to break the enemy to make good use of it, and the damage is break effect dependent, which most dot characters don't bother investing in that stats. So basically for dot team, it's just an extra 1 or 2 dot ticks for them. Even for Super Break team, this is more like a extra damage that they can dish, while Super Break damage does all the work. At the moment, the game break dots works differently for each element, as I've shown briefly in the break dot damage calculation. To remind you, for instance, physical break dot will shave from some of the enemy's max HP, while wind will give different stacks of wind shear, depending whether it is an elite or normal enemies, while lightning and fire doesn't have anything special to it when you inflict the break dot. Honestly though, this whole mechanic feels like it is still undercooked, as if the developers were not sure on what direction they want to go with this particular mechanics when they make the game. Feels like there's a lot more they can do with this, honestly. So this whole mechanics must be developed further by making them as essential part of the dot characters. Like, I don't know, make it a big dot detonation with a much higher damage multiplayer compared to dot applied by character skills. Or if you want to take my elemental reaction idea, make it so that it can only be triggered when you are breaking the enemies or something. If not, at the bare minimum, make it so that lightning and fire break dot actually have their own unique property. Well, that's the 6 design problems that I came up with based on my observation after thinking about it. It's not perfect. Some of you might not even agree with what I've said. But if any of the above changes are implemented, I think it will somewhat be a step in solving the problem with dots. Since I think trying to release a character will not be a long-term solution, as this will only cause dot to be even more very character dependent, because usually the challenge favors newly released character, and after that, they will become a mediocre team again. They don't have to apply all of these changes at once. It could be an incremental update into the mechanics. So with that out of the way, will Hysilens solve our dot problem? There's no leaked kit of her yet, but we can infer what her kit will be from her Golden Blood boon in the Divergent universe. From my understanding of her boon, it seems it is a dot type that relies on others dealing damage, as her special bleed will detonate by either attacking or another dot triggered on the enemy. And on top of that, the dot can also be triggered during the applier's turn, and the damage will increase as more turn passes. So basically, it won't just triggers during the enemy's turn, but it will also trigger on Hysilens' turn, or even better, in all character turn. Honestly, it is a very interesting kit. It might be a very powerful one at that. But honestly, I'm not seeing her as the solution for the dot problem, as we end up still being character dependent. And the moment we put her out of the team, dot will be slow again. So it kind of limits your team building in a sense. One thing that I can see her to be able to somewhat solve the dot problem if she ended up having a universal passive that allows character to just trigger dot via attacks, much like my point 1 in the discussion, or allowing it to trigger during the original dot's applier's turn. Of course, player still needs to pull for her, but at least now you don't have to put her if you want to play around with different combination of dot characters. This is a rather niche passive. I don't think that will cause an uproar, much like how so many people were against universal passive when Cast Race was out. While in theory, universal passive, if it is handled correctly, it can be a step in fixing many issues in Honkai Star Rails. But then again, the drawback will be people will complain because now we need to pull for the characters if we want the passive, blah blah blah. You cannot please everyone. But ultimately, I think it is still better to just fix the game mechanics rather than relying on characters, because you will lock out certain players in actually having a good dot team. Alright, that's all I can say about the dot discussion. I hope this has stimulated your brain a little and makes you come up with your own solution on how dots can be improved. And I really hope you enjoyed this particular discussion. Anyway, for the next video, we are going back to my original plan in analyzing Kafka's buff, and I will come up with my own ideas on how should we buff Kafka. So if you are looking forward to that, or just want more of my own discussion video, leave a like and subscribe to my channel. It will help me a ton to keep making content, and hopefully we're getting more aware about game designs and game developments. Thanks for watching. Until the next video, stay sharp gamers.